Our next panel is on why an all-of-the-above energy strategy, including oil, gas, and coal, is essential for freedom, prosperity, and the planet. I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel, and then they will all take the stage, and then our moderator, Drew Bond, will introduce the panelists. Drew is the co-founder and president of C3 Solutions. He served as a senior advisor for President George W. Bush at the U.S. Department of Energy. He was also chief of staff at the Heritage Foundation for Ed Fulner, and as a legislative, also served as a legislative assistant to former U.S. Senator Don Nichols from Oklahoma. Drew is also the co-founder, president, and CEO of Powerfield Energy, Inc., which provides an innovative and affordable solar energy system which is suitable for rural agriculture and emerging market applications. So let's welcome our panel to the stage, and then Drew will introduce our panelists. Welcome.
Winter getting colder, summer getting warmer, tidal wave come across the Mexican border. Wine by gallon is cheaper by the barrel, just don't get busted singing Christmas carols. That's us, that's right, gotta love this American ride. Both ends of the ozone burning.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I don't know about you, but after a good debate like that, I feel like I'm kind of fired up a little bit. So I'll try to bring my nerves down a little bit, but really so appreciate the Steamboat Institute for hosting this event and for having civil debates on topics that it seems like we can't have civil debates anymore in society. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here. And so the topic of this panel is really focused on all the above and why all the above is an important energy strategy for people and the planet. And all the above actually includes not just so-called clean energy, which you could include nuclear in that, certainly renewables, but also oil and gas and coal. And so I have the opportunity to moderate a discussion with these two experts. I want to give just a quick introduction in terms of their backgrounds if you don't know them. They are thoroughly impressive, and so I think it's just important that you understand sort of what they've done in their careers. And so I'll introduce them, and then we'll go straight into questions. So first of all, Aurelia Skipwith Giacometto. So Aurelia is the general counsel of AVC Global and the 22nd director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. AVC Global is a premier logistics company that works with nation governments to secure the entry and sale of pharmaceuticals into countries. In 2017, Aurelia entered government service as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of Interior. In 2019, she was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the 22nd Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She led that service, 8,500 employees with over 850 million acres of land and water to revolutionize business operations, improve service, and grant more access to the American people. She received her bachelor's degree from Howard University, master's degree from Purdue University, and law degree from University of Kentucky. She serves on several boards, including Ramaco Resources, a publicly traded metallurgical coal company, Protect the Harvest, Sanford Underground Research Facility Foundation, and she enjoys the outdoors. You can find her typically hunting, fishing, or running when she's not in a cast. And when she's not in a cast, she holds a sub 3-hour marathon time. Which is incredible. So I would be like sub 7, I think. So Chris Wright is the CEO of Liberty Energy. He's the founder and executive chairman of Liberty Resources, a Bakken-focused E&P company, and Liberty Midstream Solutions. He founded Pinnacle Technologies, and from 1992 to 2006, served as CEO. Pinnacle created the hydraulic fracturing mapping industry, which helped launch commercial shale gas production in the late 1990s. So we have to thank you for a lot of our energy freedom that we've experienced in the last decade. Chris was chairman of Stroud Energy, an early shale gas producer, and prior to its sale to Range Resources in 2006. He's a lifelong passion for energy and the role in human life. He's worked on multiple forms of energy, including not only oil and gas, but also fusion, solar, and geothermal. He's consulted and taught courses around the world, authored, co-authored over 60 technical papers and articles. He's spoken on energy to the UK House of Lords. The state's attorney general, federal states judges debated the merits of the shale revolution on TV and given over 100 talks. And I'm condensing his resume. He served on several boards, including Liberty Resources, Urban Solutions Group, U.S. Ceramics, the Federal Reserve Bank, Denver branch, PERC, which is the, if you don't know them, you should. It's the Property and Environment Research Center, ACE Colorado, ACE Montana, PRI, and YCCF. He completed his mechanical engineering degree at MIT, graduate work in electrical engineering at both UC Berkeley and MIT. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got an incredible panel. Please welcome our guests, and I'm going to go straight into the questions. So, Aurelia, I want to start with you because the topic of this discussion is all the above energy, and you've spent your life primarily in really sort of natural resources, the supply chain of food, agriculture, medicine, and now on the board of a coal company. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what does all the above energy mean to you? Not just in terms of like the definition, but personally, what does it mean to you in terms of how you travel around the world when you've served at the U.S. Department of Interior? Help us understand your lens through which you look there.
Yeah, so when I think of all the above, it really is, what are all the sources? And when you look at where we are today, it's because we've been able to leverage what's above the ground, on the ground, and below the ground. And being able to take that, plus the technology, has really made America a powerhouse. So we've been able to eat, we've been able to keep ourselves warm during cool times, and cool during hot times. And these are staples. Like, you don't think about, if I flip the switch, is the light going to come on? And so we have our staples, and then you have zealots that take it for granted. So I've traveled to Africa both for work and leisure, and what we have as staples here are luxuries in some of those countries that I've gone to. And you look at it, and you're like, why is this the kind of situation? And what I've seen here, and even the statistics show that in the past 200 years, we have been able to double our life expectancy. And that is because we have leveraged and used the technology of our resources. And other countries have those resources as well. So it's not about, the resources themselves, but it's my concern that I see today is the aggressive goals that are set by this administration. And we've had some other speakers that have gone through what those details are, so I won't go back through them. But it's the pure ramp up of changing our society without the considerations. And I have four kind of prerequisites that I look at. And is it reliable? Is it stable? And when I think of stable, I also think of resiliency. And then you look at the affordability piece, and then the other part is responsible. And responsible, for me, it falls under two categories. You have the social part, and then you have the environmental part. And so when I'm making my decisions, when I was at the Department of Interior, when I was at my other jobs as well, and even today, it's based on sound science, the rule of law, and common sense. And a lot of people, we've had our speakers earlier today. We're going to have some other ones later today as well. And they've been great diving into the science, into the statistics, and the numbers. And I don't have the wherewithal, and I'm sure some of us in the audience don't either. But we use that information that they have. But what we do have is a thing called the common sense. And when you see something that doesn't seem logical, it's being able to call a spade when it is. And so that's why I'm glad that we're having this discussion. But it's having those peers that I use in making my decisions, either when it's at the department, and now when I sit on a coal company, the board of a metallurgical coal company, and I get the questions all the time of, why don't you ban coal? And then I say in response, well, how are you going to build those bridges to replace those racist roads? But I'll save that one for another time.
So, Aurelia, you said something which I think is really important, and you mentioned the importance of the rule of law, and as one of the many aspects in this, and just a quick plug, if I may. I mean, my organization conducted a report called "Free Economies or Clean Economies," and it talks about the importance of economic freedom, and rule of law is really critical foundation of that. And so, Chris, when you think about all the above, and you've traveled the world, you've done projects on every living continent. You run an energy company that's primarily focused on oil and gas, but it looks as though you also have a keen view towards and emphasis on your environmental responsibility around the world. How do you think about these things in the context of all the above? I mean, how do you guys approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't care where energy comes from. All I care is that energy enables better lives, lifts people up. And the human condition everywhere and always has been intimately tied with the availability and reliability and type of energy sources available. As Aurelia alluded to, the world was absolutely transformed just in the last 200 years because of a change in energy source. We had roughly 30-year human life expectancy before the invention of agriculture, all through agriculture, all till about 200 years ago. Since then, we've had as she said, a roughly doubling of human life expectancy, and we've gone from most everyone in grinding poverty to the majority of people not in grinding poverty, but still far too many in grinding poverty. That is our biggest energy challenge today. But if you fast forward to where we are today, as far as, I hear a lot of dialogue in my industry of the energy transition. I went to MIT to work on fusion energy, so I've been about new energy sources. But let's go to 1992. 30 years ago, the Kyoto Protocol sort of launched the energy transition movement. Then, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons as I call them, 87% of global energy. We've had 30 years, trillions of dollars of subsidies, countless government mandates, huge amount of research, I'm all for that. And a lot of great things being done, and we've gone over 30 years down to a little over 83% of global energy from hydrocarbons. My numbers are slightly higher than the earlier numbers you heard because I subtract out traditional biofuels. If you put them back in, you get a changing percentage. They're just older, less viable carbon-based fuels. But in any case, if we moved 4 percentage points in 30 years, if you extrapolate that, we've got 600 plus years to finish this energy transition, which I think is a deceptive and dishonest term, and actually destructive, because people believe that we're in the midst of a rapid energy transition, and decisions are made based on that. Moderate politicians oppose pipeline infrastructure. Well, we're not going to need that soon anyway. We don't need to build that last one. We're going here. We're going there. But that's not what's actually happening. Despite strong desire, despite efforts from many people in this room, including myself, the energy transition isn't failing because we're not trying hard enough. The energy transition is failing so far because it's very hard. Energy doesn't follow Moore's laws. You can't miniaturize everything. It's a real physical quantity essential for human life. We have 2 big energy challenges here I'll end with. One is more recent, started maybe 6 or 8 months ago. The seaborne price of natural gas has gone through the roof. Mostly that's because of lack of infrastructure. We didn't build natural gas export capacity fast enough. Europe didn't know they were going to need it. Asia's been behind the curve as well. So natural gas, seaborne, is incredibly expensive right now. Why does that matter? Not just expensive home heating, but half of the food we grow on the planet, half, comes from nitrogen fertilizer via this Haber-Bosch process. Natural gas is the fuel source and the raw material for this process. Fertilizer prices are escalating right now. A lot of fertilizer plants are shut down. We are heading into the early phase of a food crisis to go along with the energy crisis. And this is happening because people have been unrealistic, emotional, and political about energy and not sober. This is a problem. The other giant energy challenge is this third of humanity that doesn't have clean cooking fuels, doesn't have reliable access to electricity, and just don't have the opportunities in life we do. These are both solvable problems, but they require sober realism. Energy realism equals humanism.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I mean, I think as was touched on earlier, I mean, so often this debate feels like a a religious debate. And to your point, there's some really practical solutions. And frankly, if we focus on solutions in terms of, just simply leaving this place better than we found it, it sort of leaves open an option, multiple options. And so I'm curious, there's such an emphasis these days on ESG and sustainability. And that also can feel like a religious debate at times because, Wall Street is being, pushed very heavily on its ESG reporting and movements, and it depends on who you talk to sometimes in terms of how you define that. Your company, Chris, has taken a very concerted effort to put out a strategic plan, essentially, on your environmental sustainability and governance goals. So help us understand how an oil company, if I may, an energy services company, hydrocarbon company, thinks about the sustainability kind of component of this energy innovation and sort of where we are today with our energy resources and where you think you see us going in the next 5 or 10 years. It's a long question, I'm sorry, but
No.
help.
Yeah, that word sustainability, I think it means whatever you want it to mean. It means whatever you want. What I want it to mean is that our company is a great place to work. People are proud to work there. They're part of a mission. The communities we operate in, all across from Northeast British Columbia to the Mexican border, that in our communities we're positive, productive, open, transparent members that are welcomed, and people feel we're making lives better. That to me is sustainable. The corporate ESG movement, real quick, 2 things enabled the modern world, right? The growth of human liberty, bottom-up social organization, not top-down social organization, and the arrival of hydrocarbons. Those things created the modern world, and now we have really an investor and activist-driven ESG movement that really opposes both of those. I get these 50-page surveys to fill in the boxes of what I'm doing for this or that, but they're someone's choices, someone's priorities. People have different priorities in life and different things. And of course, it's generally hostile to hydrocarbons. We got to get rid of them as quick as we can and move somewhere else. That's sort of the diktat from on top of ESG movement. What we did was, we took that approach to just write a report. Where does the world get energy? How has that impacted human lives? How's that changing? We give an overview of climate change. Most people very passionate about climate change know almost nothing about it. Not the chemistry, not the physics, not the data, not the history, not any of the stuff you've heard. So in any case, weird for a public company CEO to write a chapter on climate change and climate economics and where the future of energy might go. But key is sobriety. I love nuclear energy. I'm working on geothermal energy again. There's neat energy technologies coming forward. I'm in favor of all of them. The problem is, everything you've heard dialogue today is about electricity. That's 20% of global energy, 20%. And of course, in poor countries, it's not even close to 20%. That's just because you average in the rich countries where it's almost 40%, right? The real challenges today in energy is clean cooking fuels, things that, transportation fuels, things that increase agricultural productivity. So we try to highlight in that report and in our company what motivates us. We talk about social issues in there as well, but look, in a free market economy, in a free society, everyone's got different views and different attitudes. If you're a business, if people don't believe in you, they don't want to work at your company and they don't want to buy your products, fortunately, you're not going to be a successful business. But we don't need a top-down diktats of what companies in various industries should do to be virtuous. And certainly, like BlackRock was the biggest driver of this. We need to stop investing in oil and gas, and we got to demonize this industry, and everyone's got to show us a plan or how they're getting out. Larry Fink, obviously a very smart guy, the guy who runs BlackRock, was asked at the COP26 conference, what's the problem in the world today? What's this energy crisis that's unfolding 6 or 9 months ago? And he said, underinvestment in oil and gas and fossil fuels. Spot on there. But man, if you've got a decade of advocating for that, you've got to bear a little responsibility when the ramifications of that come through.
Yeah. That's so important. And I love how your company has thought about and written about and laid out your strategic plans around your interpretation of ESG, because as you said, it really is an opportunity there, I think, to think holistically about how do we treat our employees, how do we operate as a company, and a lot of those things I think are inherently, I would call them conservative principles, that you actually care about others more than yourself. But so, Aurelia, I want to know from your perspective, thinking in your background, the supply chain of, beginning with agriculture, leading through to production and even medicine, but now, sitting on the board of a coal company. I'm really curious to know, like, how does a coal company think about this discussion around ESG? Do they just want to, like, kick it out the window, or are they, having to really think really serious about this and, just help us understand what that looks like?
Okay, so I'm going to break it up into kind of two pieces. One on the sustainability piece, and then I'm going to then pivot to the ESG. So when I think of sustainability, it really is looking at what is the whole process, what is the whole life cycle of something. And so sustainability is from when it's produced to, when it's decommissioned or when it's no longer on the table. And so for me, it's the transparency. And that comes to what are all the inputs, what are all the costs that it takes for the life cycle of something. And so for sustainability, and I'm going to go back to those four little prerequisites that I talked about, and that does play into when we're looking at kind of all the above and tying it back to energy and climate. And so you kind of have to put on those lenses when you're looking at what is something that's going to be sustainable, what's long lasting. And for wind turbines, for example, and you look at when something is produced, how is it reliable? You think about how often does the wind blow? What do you do when it doesn't blow? If it's stable, if there is an anomaly that happens, do you still have power? Is it affordable? What are the costs to manufacture? What are the costs to decommission? What is the cost to transmission or transport it to where it needs to go? What is the cost to operate it over its lifetime? And then on the responsible part, which really plays a lot into my background when you're looking at the environmental and the social piece, you look at, that is taking up a piece of land. And when I was at the Fish and Wildlife Service, you're evaluating that. Is it something that is in the flyway of a bird? So you think about how many bald eagles, how many golden eagles, bats, birds that are killed when you're erecting these buildings. And then when you're decommissioning, you look at the blades. Those are made of fiberglass. That's not something that you can just hope decomposes. They're either buried or they're put into the landfill. So that's another cost that has to be factored in. So when you're looking at sustainability, you're looking at the supply chain. And so I think that that's a really key piece in that evaluation. And so then when you're shifting and you're looking at ESG, yes, they want things to be sustainable. People think of sustainability, they think of green, and if it's green, then it's clean, and then that must be the best method out there. And for me, when I'm looking at what is sustainable, I think of green as well, but I think of green as in money, because
You're a capitalist.
but I mean, it's the value that you place on something, because it costs. Nothing is free. Someone is going to end up paying the cost of it. So who ends up bearing that cost? So I'm looking at it green as where's the value? And when you're looking at these ESG criteria that are coming on, you have several stakeholders that are playing into that. And so I'm looking at the stakeholders. You have government, you have your activist groups, and then you have the companies. So I do sit on the board of the coal company, and because they're also a publicly traded company, they do have ESG requirements that are, that they have to fulfill. The thing of it is that bothers me. I believe in community citizenship, that you should give back to the community that you're operating in. But with ESG, it's very nebulous. I see it as a rebranding of when we had corporate social responsibility. The difference is that you have both a stick and teeth. There's no incentives and there's no give. And the reason that it's so kind of nebulous is it's led by these activist organizations. There's no standards that go across the board that say this is what you need to do to make sure that you're compliant. They're picking and choosing who winners are. And so when you have the activist organizations that are leading this agenda, it then starts to put certain industries in kind of a quandary or conundrum. So you have the fossil fuel industries that are dealing with it. You see agriculture that's dealing with it as well. You're going to start to see some of the recreation and outdoor groups, as well as gun rights and Second Amendment organizations, because they don't fit the narrative that the activist groups that are pushing the ESG. Then you have the student activists that come in. And I found a very interesting, about a few weeks ago, there are 5 student organizations from Ivy League schools, from like MIT, Vanderbilt, and they wrote to their representative state AGs, and they wanted to file a breach that their trustees at their school had not divested from the fossil fuel industries, and for that, that's a breach of their duties as trustees of the school. So you have young students, they want to do good, but it's the education piece. And then you have the government. And I will give credit to this administration, because this administration has taken a concerted, collaborative, cooperative approach to reorganize how we do things. And they've done it in such a way that has subverted our rights as people, and they have been able to circumvent the legislative process. And so you see in each of these organizations or each of these agencies, they've created new departments that are either environmental justice, or they've put in a person that is at a high level that is focused on this. And that's in order to get the green agenda through, because they didn't go through the regular process. So when I see ESG and sustainability, there are some industries that are going to be hit really hard by these requirements that don't have standards.
So help us understand that from your time at the Department of Interior, head of Fish and Wildlife. This panel discussion is about all the above and how we can invest in and deploy more abundant sources of energy, right? We have abundant energy in the United States, and whether you want more solar or wind or nuclear or natural gas, like you name it, right? The challenge is we really can't do all of that fast enough in many respects because of the regulations, right? I mean, it's the siting, it's the permitting, it's many cases some of the environmental regulations that are getting in the way of the environmental movement's desire to deploy more clean energy. But so I'd love to hear from you, from wearing your former Department of Interior hat. Give us some specific examples, if you can, disclose of those, sort of how you encountered, what did you encounter in relation to this, and how did you guys overcome that?
So whenever a project comes before you, that's why you have the laws. That's why it's really important, the science that is out there, because your decisions, my decisions, were made on science, the rule of law, and common sense. So you would see a plethora of projects that would come through either from solar, wind, oil and gas, coal, and you had your laws that you followed, and there were factors in the laws, and those factors guided how you made your decisions. And two of the primary ones being at the Fish and Wildlife Service, and when you were making your decisions, you had the Endangered Species Act, and you would follow what those guidelines were. You also had the consultation that you would have to do if you were a cooperating agency. And then you also had the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And a lot of these environmental laws came out in the 1960s, 1970s. And they had a great intent when they came out. But since then, they have been used in such a way to create barriers and hindrances when it comes to permitting projects. One of the primary, so there are several initiatives when you're going in, when you're going into to serve the president, you're there to put in those policies. And it was clear from day one what the prior administration was focused on. And it was making sure that decisions were made and people had access. So one of the things, one of the executive orders that came out was, we want to reduce the regulatory red tape that we had. So for every one significant rule that was put on the book, you had to take one off. Under that administration, 8 came off for every one that went on. And that saved over $50 billion in regulatory costs. And when President Trump came in and when he left office, there was less regulations on the books than when he came in office. And no other president has ever done that. And so when you're looking at how do you make these laws and regulations in such a way that people are able to make decisions, you're not looking at playing favorites for different industries. You're making sure that whatever is said in the science that you follow is science. And that was something that was problematic when working in the department, because you would have your information, you would have the climate models, which, you know, as I'm watching the other speakers talk, you would be presented with climate models that would go out to 2100. You would have 4 different scenarios, and the decisions that would come before you would go out to 2100 using the most extreme scenario. About 30 years is when most of those models would be, you would have reliable information. After those 30 years, they'd split off and you would have this huge divergence. And so they would choose the one that would diverge the most, showing the most extreme climate. The species is going to be wiped out, you know, it's going to be heat everywhere. And you would ask a question like, why would you use something that's not reliable? And then we ended up putting in regulations that said, you look at where you have reasonable information. And so whenever you would ask a question or want to use data that seemed more reliable, you would be branded as politicizing or trying to change the data. And that's not what it's about. It's about letting the data explain itself. And so that's what we would use when making our decisions.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, I just want to give you guys tremendous credit. The work you guys did on NEPA reform was incredible. I'm sorry to say this administration threw that out the window, but hopefully we can get back there, because it is one of those things where, regardless of where you are on sort of the climate meter, whether you're a denialist or an alarmist, like ultimately it all comes back to like you've got to deploy more energy faster. And that's good for people, it's good for the planet, and you can't do that with the regulations that are in place. But Chris, you probably know better than anybody else in terms of regulations, having, you operate an energy company. So give us some examples of some of the regulations that you've run into, and how do we get sort of beyond focusing on the problems and actually get to the solutions?
Oh, we need light and visibility as the disinfectant. Yeah, the regulatory process has become crazy. And I'll start out by saying, oil and gas industry is not against regulation. The point of regulation and what we need is to protect health and safety of the broader environment. And it's positive for our industry, right? Because we get judged by the actions of the worst player in our industry. The state of North Dakota which went from a sleepy state with 70 years of declining population to a rural state, and from 39th in per capita income to 6th, in 7 or 8 years from shale activity. But they originally just had older regulations, and they didn't require when you drill a well, you put a steel pipe in and you cement on the outside. That cement is the most important to protect the environment for safety piece of the whole operation. And they just had older regulations that didn't require, after you cement, run a log that goes in to make sure the cement job's good. The industry pushed, hey, this should be in the regulations. We don't want anybody coming up here and doing a bad cement job, not confirming they got a good cement job. Let's get that in the regulations. And of course, it did. So there's things in there that should be there. But today, of course, from the federal government and right here in the state of Colorado, the regulations are absurd, and they're not to be better protection of the health and safety. They're to make it very difficult, very slow, very expensive, and to inject some uncertainty so that, what big government is the partner of big business. People say, I hate big businesses and government's got to keep them in line. No, big government's the ally of big companies because they can deal with this endless bureaucracy. What it does is it squelches entrepreneurs, small upstarts that want to go kick the butts of the big incumbents, that want to drive innovation. You squelch innovation, which is what Colorado's done. The little players are selling out, combining. We're going to have just a few players. The rate of innovation in Colorado is going to come to a screeching halt. And a lot of it is driven by climate concerns, right? It's about climate. It's about climate. Well, of course, it has nothing to do with climate, because when you put all these regulations and you stop drilling on federal lands in the US or Colorado, you've done nothing, zero, to change the demand for oil and gas, right? You've just changing it where it's going to be produced. Instead of probably the cleanest operations there are here in the state of Colorado, and certainly in the United States, when you stop it here, you're not helping climate change. You're making that same product produced in a less careful way, less protective of the environment, certainly higher emissions. You're moving blue-collar jobs to somebody else, hurting the U.S. economically, actually hampering our ability to help Europe, who's in deep trouble, for their 2 decades of malinvestment and unfortunate lack of energy realism. They did something that felt good and sounded good, and all the reports said it was good, but of course it wasn't. They made energy more expensive, they made energy less reliable, and they exported their industries. The more recent one that's gone very hard out, the United Kingdom, they're very proud. They have the largest % reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. They exported all of their energy-intensive industries outside of the country. Because who would make stuff in a place that's expensive and electricity and even heating fuel are unreliable? They now have the great distinction of the largest importer of greenhouse gas emissions per capita of any country in the world. Moving where something is made is not green. It's not about climate change at all. And what has been the biggest driver of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the United States? By far and away, the surge of shale gas and natural gas, right? The United States per capita greenhouse gas emissions last year were lower than any year since I was born. So the needle movers, if your issue is greenhouse gases, is natural gas number one. Nuclear certainly has a meaningful role to play. But of course, both of those are very unpopular with that, and you've got to say, in quotes, climate activists. There are some groups that are about the numbers and truly focused on that. But the government effort in this area isn't really about tweaking down greenhouse gas emissions. If it was, they would behave differently.
Yes, so,
can I add something to that?
yeah, we've just got 6 minutes, so I want to get to some questions from the audience, but please, yep.
But just, I mean, as we're watching the news and seeing how the gas prices are spiking, it really wasn't that long ago where we had gas prices that were $2. And that was something that was a priority of the last administration. And you can see how the policies really do have an effect on everyday life. And so it was not that America was going to be energy independent, it was about being energy dominant. And in 2019, became a net exporter of oil products. And the last time that happened was 1952. So you have to be intentional. And we made sure that we opened up public lands for oil and gas drilling. And you can see when the new administration came in, he did exactly what he said, and you can see what the results are.
Good, so that's a perfect segue to the first question. We've got 5 questions in 5 minutes, so we'll try to run through these.
Quick
about that. And they're probably still rolling in. But so the first one is for probably you, Chris. What are the possibilities for the rest of the world to replicate the fracking that transformed the U.S. energy production?
The resources are there, shale's all over the place. The reason it happened here is we're the only country in the world where individuals own the mineral rights below. Our partners are farmers and ranchers or neighborhoods. In the rest of the world, even the United Kingdom, the birthplace of secure property rights, the government owns the subsurface rights. The resources are there, the structure and the aligned incentives aren't there yet, but they could be, and I suspect in the next generation they will be.
Great. Aurelia, can you talk about the bird death numbers for the wind industry? What are the numbers per year, and does this death affect other ecosystems such as flora and fauna?
So, I mean, when the projects come up, you evaluate it. So I will say I would have to get back to you on like what the total number would be. But when the evaluations come in for a project, you look at what they're proposing those deaths are. But there's a whole process that goes along, and that comes back to NEPA. You first look at how do you avoid whatever those impacts are to the wildlife. If you can't avoid it, then you look to minimize it. And if you can't minimize it, then you mitigate it. So whatever impacts you're having, it should be a net zero. So you're replacing whatever impact that you have had.
Okay, good. So maybe for Chris, please address the famous 9,000 existing lease permits that the administration responds to deflect the barriers they're throwing in the way of production.
So the 9,000 leases in option. You can drill on that property if you get permits and if it economically makes sense. So leases are just a first step. That's not an ability to drill. You have to get drilling permits, which of course have come to a screeching halt.
All right. How's that for a fine point?
I'm trying to be fast.
Well done. All right, we might get to more questions. So in the theme of climate change and oil and gas, how do you think how can we make the industry more sustainable? Are CO2 injection methods for enhanced oil recovery a possible solution, for example? Maybe to you, Chris?
Yeah, so I first got into climate change a little more than 20 years ago. National Labs reached out to me. I had a company that developed technologies for measuring the motion of fluid deep underground. So we started measuring demonstration CO2 sequestration 20 years ago. Can that be scaled up? Yes, absolutely. It's practical. It's more practical than most of the decarbonization ideas you have, but it still adds a lot of expense. Is it going to economically make sense? Is it going to make the world a better place? Not with what we know today. The one thing that is exciting that could make this easier is there's a thing called the alum process, which is a way to burn natural gas in a power plant instead of with air, but in supercritical oxygen. There's only oxygen in CO2 in the combustion stream. So all that comes out is, when you combust natural gas, there's two byproducts. Water vapor, that's the white cloud you see going up, and CO2, which is invisible. So in an alum process, you can condense out the water and you have CO2, pure CO2, at high pressure, and that would probably make disposal of it underground probably economically viable. That's probably the single biggest new decarbonization technology you'll probably see a lot of in the next 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's exciting. I know a company in Houston that's working on that. So
yeah.
Maybe you know them. So maybe for Aurelia, how do you educate young people to be more realistic about energy policy?
I would say it's having Steamboat going to
Good answer.
more schools and having these debates. But it's also talking, regular everyday conversations that you're having with your children, with your children's friends, figuring out other ways to counter what's out there in the media, because that's really what's dominating those conversations, and no one hears that other side of things. So I would say really just being able to find ways to get the message out.
That's great. So we've got 1 minute. I'm going to let Chris respond to this. And then we were going to talk about all the exciting innovations that you guys see. That would probably take a whole nother hour. So maybe we'll just end with this to try and stay on time. As Chris, talk about what do we do to educate?
The innovations are over drinks tonight. So energy education, here's my idea. If it's your kids or whatever, go on a trip. Go to Africa, go to the Caribbean, go to Indonesia, go to Malaysia, go to India. And what you see is a third of humanity doesn't have clean cooking fuels. They cook their meals burning wood, dung, and agricultural waste indoors. To Andy's point earlier, that kills 3 million people a year. Indoor particulate matter pollution in these homes and huts. Women in traditional society spend over an hour a day gathering fuel wood, about an hour a day gathering clean water. All of that because they don't have basic energy. Propane cook stove and a cylinder changes that game, saves millions of lives, changes the opportunities and the lifespans ahead, and massively changes the game for women and children in societies. If you bring people to that, they get energy, they get the importance, and they get a realistic view of it.
So that's a perfect positive note to end on. Thank you, panel.
Great job.